USC not involved in postseason play here in 2021. Unfortunately for college football fans, a number of other teams who were supposed to be involved in postseason play will not be hitting the field. The most recent announcement involving the Holiday Bowl with UCLA taking on NC State. That game has been canceled due to COVID issues with UCLA. We got Matt Zemek on the line, as we always do each and every Tuesday, to talk USC football, the Pac-12, and the nation. You can catch Matt's work on Trojans Wire. Matt, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays. I hope everything's going well.
Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays to you, Mark. Really appreciate it.
So, yeah, unfortunately, as we just got on the line together here in the last couple of minutes, you told me that you were finishing up a recap of what went down in San Diego regarding UCLA's football team not being able to field enough players to compete tonight in the Holiday Bowl. But this is, I believe, the sixth game that's been impacted in the bowl season.
It has. Now, the plot twist here, Mark, is that this game got called off 5 hours before kickoff, like going right down to the wire. And apparently, per Bruce Feldman, who broke this story, UCLA was good enough to play yesterday, but not today. Like, boy, that is just such a last minute deal. And so I don't want to say like, okay, you just have to push through and play no matter what. I mean, we want to honor public health and safety, but this is no way to run a business, and this is no way to treat paying customers. This is definitely no way to treat the NC State fans who went all the way from Raleigh to San Diego across the whole United States, the contiguous 48 states, to see a game they were excited about, that we were excited about. But boy, you got to have a better plan. You got to have more contingencies. It's very interesting. Next week we have LSU in the Texas Bowl, and LSU appealed to the NCAA to have for a waiver so that Garrett Nussmeier could play without burning his red shirt. Like, that's the decision LSU is waiting for from the NCAA to hopefully allow Garrett Nussmeier to play. Because if he can't, then LSU has to play a walk-on at quarterback. But doesn't that bring up the larger point, right, Mark, that bowl games should not count toward red shirts? Like, that should be pretty obvious. One would have to think that this situation with UCLA is going to move the ball in that direction, but we should be doing other things to make sure that these bowl games that people travel across the country for, they're not scheduled months in advance. They're scheduled weeks in advance. Like, you need to put on the event. You need to find a solution so that people, commit to holiday travel. They're making a sacrifice of time, money, resources. You need to give them what they pay for. So, like, we need to find out ways to expand rosters. And the other thing is, and we're going to touch on this a little bit it's kind of a separate thing, but it's still kind of under this larger umbrella of issues, that if we want to reduce players opting out of these bowl games, such as the Peach Bowl, such as the Rose Bowl, showcase games, players should be given a take-home paycheck. Not a king's ransom, but like give them $1,000 check. Like, ESPN's making enough money is being generated that you can do that. And you can honor the work that's going into this from the athlete side. In terms of the Holiday Bowl, like, there's Arash Markazi, longtime Los Angeles-based journalist. He tweeted out a lovely photo of Petco Park, the new home for the game, all decked out, painted end zones, the football layout for a baseball stadium. A lot of man hours went into putting on that event and staging it. And now for what? So, hopefully this is going to reform. I'm not anti-bowl. I'm just against the way the bowls are put out, in terms of the current format. You just have to treat your product and value it a lot more than what we've seen. So, college football will hopefully dramatically, substantially reform the way it administers these bowl games so that we don't have these kinds of situations again with NC State, UCLA. It's avoidable, and it shouldn't be viewed as acceptable by any means.
UCLA was eligible under the protocols to have played a football game yesterday, but not today. Also, along the lines in which you're hitting, one of the reasons the main reason we have these crazy names of these bowl games is because of the sponsorships. Well, the sponsorships are the outdated version of NIL to a certain extent. Why don't we just use some of that money that's being paid to the various, well, TV networks first and foremost, but everybody else that paid by that particular company, and circumvent that money and pay the players to try to ensure the product?
I mean, you put it beautifully, Mark. I mean, there's not much for me to add there. Like, there should be a way to just fold that into the NIL provisions and enable players to get a cut so that they're not opting out of these bowl games. Like, that's you put it great, and hopefully that'll be done in some form or fashion.
As I stated off the top, of course, following a 4-8 season, USC not involved in postseason play, but we would expect that to change immediately next season. And we've hit a point in which even the New Year's Six games, as you well know, Matt, in tracking all of this, as recently as just a couple years ago, seemed to be safe. And now they've even hit a level in which, of course, you have better teams in those games. Therefore, you're more likely to have more NFL prospects. Therefore, those games are not being seen and placed on the same standard as they have in the past. Therefore, we have opt-outs at the Rose Bowl, the Peach Bowl, and all the New Year's Six games. And in particular, we've got near and dear to your geographic situation there at the Rose Bowl with Ohio State and Utah. The Buckeyes have 4 players opting out. And you just have recently, don't want to give away your article because we want to send people over to Trojans Wire, but related that to what USC could be facing in a game that if there's a brand that is attached to the Rose Bowl, having won more Rose Bowls than any school in history by far, it is, of course, USC and the Rose Bowl.
Yeah, so with Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave opting out of the Rose Bowl for Ohio State, I mean, so the Rose Bowl is not viewed as above opting out. I mean, at least for these players, like, they did not feel like, whoa, I have to play in the Rose Bowl. Like, this is a life moment for me. Nope, got to prepare for the NFL draft. So if the Rose Bowl is not a playoff semifinal, it's not worth playing. I mean, that's the message those Ohio State players are sending. And I'm not criticizing them for doing that. It's their body, it's their NFL career. They have the right to do that. No criticism toward them. But this is the attitude in the air now. Like, this is the new world. This is the new environment. This is the new culture where the Rose Bowl is just another exhibition game for a number of players. And so that hits pretty deeply. That cuts deep, certainly out here in the Pac-12. And of course, USC under Lincoln Riley is probably going to get into a situation that Pete Carroll's USC teams faced a lot. You're on the cut line trying to get into, the national championship tournament, or in Pete Carroll's day, it was just the BCS national championship game. And so making the Rose Bowl often meant you weren't playing for the national championship. And that would obviously create a great tension and a great disconnect, because the Rose Bowl is supposed to be sacred at USC, much as it was sacred at Ohio State. I mean, imagine Woody Hayes coaching Ohio State today and seeing these players opt out. Like, first off, I don't think he would have allowed it. Secondly, like, if they insisted on doing it, like, he would have had a heart attack. Like, it's impossible to imagine. So, I mean, the Rose Bowl was supposed to be sacred, and now it isn't anymore. And so it just invites the question of, in a couple years, before, with the playoffs still at 4 teams, like, if when the playoff goes to 12, assuming that happens at some later point, USC is probably going to be in it pretty regularly, and the Rose Bowl might be a quarterfinal. And so that tension point will go away. But let's say the playoff doesn't happen until 2025, 2026. We could easily have a situation where in 2023 or 2024, with a 4-team playoff, USC narrowly misses the playoff. It loses that a game late in the season, just as it did under Pete Carroll in 2006 to UCLA. So the Rose Bowl is a consolation prize, and it might feel like a disappointment. But really, if you win the Rose Bowl at USC, it shouldn't ever feel like a bad year. But that's what the BCS did, right? And the playoff has not fixed that. Obviously, USC hasn't been in the college football playoff. This was only a BCS era problem for USC. But in 2 or 3 years, we're probably going to have that tension point where USC is in the playoff hunt, narrowly misses the playoff, and quote unquote has to settle for the Rose Bowl. And we should never be in that position, right? It should always be special for USC, for Michigan, for Ohio State to play in the granddaddy, and it is the first bowl game of them all. It's what got all of this started, even before you had the sugar, the orange, the cotton. Some of the most famous and important games in college football history were Rose Bowls from the 1920s. 1925 game between the Four Horsemen of Notre Dame and Pop Warner's Stanford team. That was a seminal moment in college football history. And then the very next year, in many ways, the birth of Alabama football. Like Alabama became Alabama going all the way back to that 1926 Rose Bowl upset of Washington. If Alabama doesn't win that game, the Crimson Tide might never have thought of themselves as a program worthy of aspiring to absolute greatness in college football. We might not have Nick Saban leading a dynastic power at Alabama if you didn't have that Rose Bowl in 1926. So, there's significance here, there's stature here, there's tradition here, and it's all being undercut. And it's a process that began with the BCS when, you could go when going to the Rose Bowl or go for an SEC team, going to the Sugar Bowl meant that you didn't play for the national title. And it just created that emotional separation where something which was sacred for decades stopped being sacred. And we have to find a way to bring that back to college football.
Because Matt, for all the things that have changed in college football, let's say in the last 40 years, that's one thing that has not changed, is that there are players participating for these high-level teams that have secured their NFL status, the scouting report on them in the NFL, and they are playing in bowl games that are not meaningful if you consider the national championship to be the only thing meaningful. That they are playing in bowl games that were once considered sacred, regardless of whether it was number 6 playing number 14 in the Rose Bowl or Cotton Bowl, but there was a certain status to playing in those bowl games, and we would have never imagined anyone would have opted out. But the circumstances were no different. You had NFL caliber players playing in a game that did not factor into a national championship, but they chose to play. They didn't know any better, if that's how you want to phrase it. But now we are 40 years later, and they're making that decision to not play in that game. So, for example, you painted a picture that made me think back to USC and Ohio State in the 85 Rose Bowl, and I'm thinking about all the NFL players in that game that were playing in a game that did not factor into the national championship vote. Both teams had about 3 losses, but you had Chris Carter and Chris Spielman and Jim Lachey and Pepper Johnson and a bevy of NFL players all over that field. Keith Byers. It was the Rose Bowl. They played in the Rose Bowl.
And it was a joy to play in the Rose Bowl.
Oh.
Like it was your season. It was the culmination of what you worked for in the 1980s. And it's so I've mentioned this on previous weeks on your show. I haven't mentioned it in this one. So it just bears repeating, since we are about to have the Rose Bowl. We're in the middle of bowl week, working up to the big New Year's weekend. And it just bears repeating that if we went back to a mid-1980s style bowl system, but we also did a few things. We increased the roster sizes for players, as we've been talking about. You give players a small but real paycheck for the bowl game. And you also, in terms of, the national championship picture, you introduce flex scheduling into the regular season. You put one flex scheduled game, you rotate home and away for the various teams in the Power Fives and the FBS every year. You do that, like BYU and Coastal Carolina. They played a game on 72 hours notice last year. It blew up all the myths about, the logistics are too impossible to flex schedule a game. No, you do that one time. You reserve an open date in November each year. It's a TV bonanza for ESPN. You do like Michigan, Oklahoma, second weekend of November. You flex schedule it. You announce the matchup in the middle of October, something like that, based on the first half of the season results. And it would just be an enormous windfall. And it would, create these national championship eliminator games, You do all that, and then you have the normal traditional 1985 style New Year's Day bowl lineup where the SEC champion goes to the Sugar and is happy. The Big 12 champion goes to the Orange Bowl and is happy. Pac-12 champion, Big 10 champion go to the Rose Bowl and they're happy. And then you do a +1 after all the bowls are over to decide the national champion. You don't have any rankings shows. You have a rankings reveal after the bowl games to decide that those two teams that are going to play in the national title game. And that way you're not going to, you might not guarantee participation, 100% participation from all players in all of those New Year's Day bowl games. Like the Cotton Bowl might be between a number 8 and a number 11 team. And the players on those two teams know, well, even if we win, we're not going to be part of the national title. But you certainly aren't going to have players opt out of the Rose Bowl if one of the two teams has, maybe like a 35-40% chance of being in that +1 national championship game. So there's a way to do this better, and I think we are headed for a 12-team playoff. But let's say that the powers that be want to experiment with this 12-team playoff. And what I mean by that, Mark, is no 12-year deal. Let's not lock ourselves into a plan that carries past a decade, because this is a 12-year. The college football playoff was initially a 12-year plan from 2014 through 2025. Let's just try like a 3 or 4 year deal. And then if that, doesn't really satisfy everybody, let's go back to 1985, but you add a +1 at the end, to resolve the debates such as Colorado, Georgia Tech, 1990, Miami, Washington, 1991. You just have that one game at the end, which, it wouldn't have always solved the problem, but it usually would have. And given that you're keeping all that tradition, or in this case, bringing back that tradition that you had in the 1980s, when the Rose Bowl was still sacred, that would be worth the trade-off for college football, in my opinion.
So, Matt, you've brought this up in the past. This is the first time you've framed it up top to bottom. So you're piquing my interest here, because I'm a playoff guy in that. This is an oxymoron because I'm a traditionalist. I love the bowl games. And so in a perfect world, I would want to retain all the pageantry and the tradition and the importance of the bowl games, but still have a playoff system that determines, okay, who has earned a national championship. Okay, that has basically played itself out for the past 7, now 8 years to show us that the two cannot coexist. Okay. You're piquing my interest because on the surface, when you mentioned this a few weeks ago, I thought, okay, I like the idea. I'm thinking of obviously the split national championships would have been resolved. Other than that, I'm going to have to go year by year, and I'm not expecting perfection. As you mentioned, there is no flawless system. It doesn't exist. But I would like to go year to year, maybe in the last 40 or 50 years, to figure out had all those been played out. And then even since the BCS, if we would have just gone with a traditional bowl setup and during the playoff and sent the various conference champions to their locations, how that would have played out. Of course, we wouldn't have known the winners of the games, but we could take a projection to see how that would have played out. Interesting. We'd have a Michigan-Utah Rose Bowl, for one thing. Interesting.
Which sign me up. That would be a great game, just as I think Utah, Ohio State's going to be a very good game.
And I guess you still would have the possibility, let's say it's 2011 or any other time when you had arguably the two best teams in one conference, they still default to that next game. The SEC runner-up goes and plays as a at-large at the Orange Bowl or the Citrus Bowl, wherever they're going to play. We'd have to figure that out. But if it was back to the at-large system in which all these bowls had at-large spots except for the Rose Bowl, then they're playing the best possible opponent in another game, and you possibly have a rematch somewhere, but at least it's an earned rematch based on those New Year's Day results.
Absolutely. Yeah. With a +1, you still do have, like, it's not a bracket, it's not a bracketed 1 versus 4, 2 versus 3, but you still have the fundamental component of a tournament in that you win your way into a game instead of it just being chosen. Now obviously you're kind of straddling the line. It's a bit of a gray area, but with a +1, it's unavoidable that you have to win your way into it. Like we can't have a deal in like 2003 where Oklahoma was unbeaten heading into the last weekend. It lost and it still made the BCS championship game. Like you could not have that. That would definitely be out of the picture. You also look at Georgia this year. Same deal. Was unbeaten. Everyone knew, just as a matter of the actual politics, that Georgia was guaranteed a spot. But that it's not really the way it ought to happen. So with a +1, you get two teams that win their way into a game, and I think that's in an imperfect system, it would be worth having that, and you still get, again, you would have fewer players opting out across all these bowl games. Also, keep in mind that in the old days it was a 5-game setup of bowls. You have the Fiesta and the Cotton in the early afternoon, Rose Bowl mid to late afternoon, and then the Sugar and Orange at night. With the New Year's Six, you now have the Peach Bowl as a bowl game with heightened status. You have it in Atlanta, you have it in a spiffy stadium. So you now could have a 6-game New Year's rollout. Maybe you play one of those games on New Year's Eve to kind of take the place of what the Blue Bonnet Bowl was, maybe. But you could also just do a 6-game New Year's Day rollout. And we gave this a try. We're talking about this, meaning the BCS and the college football playoff, having the various big bowl games spread out a little bit, some on New Year's Eve, some on January 1, some on January 2, 3. It was worth trying because, like, for people of a certain age, you and I are maybe not the exact same age, but we're kind of come from a similar generation. There was a part of us in the 1980s that did want to be able to watch more of each bowl game. Sometimes it got really crazy and there was too much of an overlap, between the Sugar and Orange. We both spent many New Year's nights flipping back between the Sugar and Orange, and we'd like to have seen more of those games. So when the BCS concept emerged, there was the thought, oh, okay, we're going to get to see each bowl game in a standalone fashion. It was worth trying. But now that we've gone through this for, roughly 2 decades, BCS and playoff, it's a little bit over 20 years. I think we can just see, hey, we've tried it, and 1980s were better. That pulsating excitement of seeing, Don Criqui and Bob Trumpy on NBC in the Orange Bowl, and Keith Jackson and Frank Broyles
Oh man.
In the Sugar Bowl. I mean, we looked at the other method. We looked at the alternative way. We tried it. 1980s were better. Like that's how you learn, right? You don't know until you try. So we've tried the other way, but I'm ready to go back to 1985. I don't know about you, but I'm ready.
They weren't better, but you're adding the one game that will make it better.
That's true. 1985 plus.
Yes.
Some obvious reforms. Yes.
So not that we need to sit here and work out all the details. We could be here for hours, but I would think that the Big 12, instead of going to the Orange Bowl, I'm going to mess with tradition to a certain extent because we've got to accommodate the
put
ACC.
It to the Cotton.
Yeah, they go to the Cotton Bowl and kind of play the role of the old Southwest Conference.
Yes,
and the ACC maybe goes to the Orange. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the Peach Bowl, just maybe the 2 highest ranked teams that don't make those games. I don't know. It can be worked out.
Well, and we have we could have another round of conference realignment. If we went to a 1985 style bowl system, because some schools might say, hey, maybe the conference affiliation isn't worth it, or they might say, we would like to play in this particular bowl game, so maybe we should jump out of a conference to facilitate going to a particular bowl as kind of our bowl, the way USC and Ohio State always had the Rose Bowl. It would be interesting to see. I mean, we're probably not going to have this world, Mark, but if we were to entertain visions of how it would come about, it might spur some reconsiderations in terms of alignment.
Matt's got an article out basically looking at what USC may need to deal with in the future with these opt-outs and a Rose Bowl appearance with the Ohio State situation where the Buckeyes have fallen short of the playoff and have their 2 elite wide receivers plus Nicholas Petit Friere, their top offensive tackle, and Haskell Garrett, their top defensive tackle. So 4 NFL-bound players not playing for the Buckeyes. On the USC front, before we let you go, Matt, offensive lineman Bobby Haskins moving in from Virginia.
Yeah, and for people who are watching here on the Voice of College Football, it's notable that at least 3 Virginia offensive linemen have entered the transfer portal since the Tony Elliott coaching change was announced. That's very interesting. Makes you wonder what's going on in terms of like whether these transfers were encouraged by Elliott or whether it's just players responding to evolving events on the ground. But anyway, Bobby Haskins, which you mentioned, Mark, he was an experienced pass protector for Brennan Armstrong at Virginia. So he has a lot of reps, a lot of seasoning, and is very highly regarded among offensive linemen in the country. So it's not only pulling a significant prospect in the transfer portal, but it's also recruiting on a national level. Like it definitely fits exactly what Lincoln Riley has said he wants to do. He said he wants to turn over around 35 roster spots. So, again, it's going to be hard for him to get that number. But even if you fall short, if you still make an ambitious effort, okay, you still turn over 25 to 30 roster spots. That's still substantial. And if he's getting quality transfers such as Bobby Haskins, that is definitely going to upgrade USC's roster for 2022. So it's a very exciting development for a program that, is about to enter January, and you're going to have other high-profile recruits, not transfers, but recruits, announce their decisions after the high school All-American games and other events. So USC continues to build momentum under Lincoln Riley. That's very clear right now.
All right, folks, Matt Zemek, Trojans Wire. Head on over there, check out his work covering USC and the Pac-12. Matt, we always appreciate the conversations. It's always a good time, and I will continue to have those wheels churning upstairs, considering this playoff format or the +1 format you've proposed.
I know you'll think of something good, Mark. Happy New Year to you and yours.